start by defining what these terms mean to you, AI native, AI first, whatever terms that you're using within your organization. Start defining it and get ahead of what your company thinks that is, because that's going to be critical. Build a strategy that is easy to understand, so much so that you can have people who are not in your function repeat that back to you and it still makes sense and retains the values that you think that it should. Invest in the observability and do that from the start. Don't wait until you've invested in these tools and then you can't answer questions about how much faster is it helping you be, how much more accurate, what is the cost, because those are going to be questions that are going to be asked. And the longer that you put those off, the more risk it puts your strategy under.
Welcome to Productside Stories, the podcast where we reveal the very real and raw lessons learned from product leaders and thinkers all over the world. I'm your host, Rina Alexin, CEO of Productside. Let's dive into today's episode. And today I have the pleasure of talking with Aleks Bass. Aleks, you and I had our first conversation, I think it was over a year ago at this point, back when you were the VP of product at SurveyMonkey. And I just want to first start out by saying a huge congratulations to you. I know you had a wonderful run at SurveyMonkey and the team there was great. But congratulations for being the chief product officer now at Typeform for the past actually 2 years. And I will even say you're an even rarer creature because you're actually the interim chief product and technology officer of Typeform. And it's super rare because when I see CPTOs, they usually have the T background and you come with the P background. So wonderful and great to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and excited to talk to you again, Rina.
Yeah, and the reason why we are now having this conversation is there's a LinkedIn post that you made, which caught my eye and I think caught many people's eye around becoming an AI first organization. And that's really the topic I want to delve into deeply with you. But before we do that, how has it been entering the C-suite? I know there's a lot of product leaders that want to be in your shoes and they want to hear a little bit more about your story. So tell us a little bit about how that transition in being the CPTO at Typeform has been for you.
Yeah, it's been a wild transition. Stepping into the C-suite was both exciting and grounding. On the one hand, you suddenly have visibility into every decision at the organization, strategy, people, finances, etc. On the other hand, it gives you an even stronger conviction that product leadership is about connecting many dots, right, across the organization. So my role is to make sure that the way that we build and we ship aligns with the company's vision. And at a PLG company, even in some cases, drives the company vision, right? There's a balance between supporting the company vision and driving it. And that the teams feel empowered and safe and not overburdened. So in the last year, we've launched 3 new teams, hired a bunch of people, and still maintained the highest R&D engagement score that we have ever seen at this company. And so that tells me we're building not just products, but a culture that people genuinely believe in, a strategy that people genuinely believe in. And that brings me so much joy and satisfaction. There's nothing I could say to really fully express my gratitude to the team and this experience.
So I love that you are leading with culture here, and I think there's friction points with product with just about every department because product, unfortunately or fortunately, has the role at an organization to be the change agent, right? So you often have to be the bearer of bad news as well as good news, and there is always friction between the technology department and the product department. When I hear product managers and product leaders talk about a situation where at their organization, they're reporting into a CPTO with a big T, little p, I'll say it that way. There tends to be maybe some frustration around whether or not that person has a true product sense. Have you found it the other way? Is there frustration from the technology side of the house on whether or not you have their best interests in mind?
That's a really good question. And I often think about this, Rina, because it's an interesting topic, right? Sitting in a role like this, you should be the steward of the organization and what's best for the team and the company and the customers, and just really balancing a lot of different decisions, information, investments, options, opportunities, etc. And I think regardless of whether you come from the product background, the design background, the technology background, the biggest challenges that I've seen are not having respect for each other's crafts, and the true complexity and intention and investment that it takes to get good at each of those domains, and that they are fundamentally different, and that the peak performance of any organization, any team, is those three being able to work together and have enough context in each other's worlds, roles, and responsibilities to be able to negotiate the right outcome for the customer, right? Because any of them individually without the context from the other two aren't going to do what's best for the business and what's best for the customer. And so they really need enough context to be able to have those really intentional conversations, understand the trade-offs, understand the impact, and do as best as they can for the team and the organization. And I would say, hopefully I'm doing that for this team, although we'd have to tap in some of our folks in engineering to get a true readout of how they feel. I wouldn't want to speak for them, but I have a really close collaboration and relationship with the VP of engineering at Typeform, Stefan, who is incredible. He has pioneered quite a few things in the engineering organization that support them, advocate for them, and really engage their thought processes and what they need to be the best that they can possibly be at their jobs. And I think honestly, the biggest way that I've supported that team is just not getting in the way in some of those scenarios, right? In trusting and understanding what they need and why, and willing to take a bet to try it, because, we need to be different. We need to try new things. We need to invest in things that not everybody else is doing in order for us to really have the kind of impact, right? Just using the same playbook everybody else is using isn't going to get you those results. And so putting trust in the team and having clear expectations and alignment around what we're willing to bet on has been critical. And that trust, I think, is another pillar, Rina, that I think is really interesting to explore, because when the challenges that I see is people getting into each other's lanes because of trust, right? They don't have the trust. They don't believe that the product manager is going to do the thing that they need to do in order to prioritize the right stuff for the business. Or they don't believe that the designer is going to do the thing that they need to do, or that they don't believe that the engineer is going to build the right thing in the right way for the customer. And I would say we've done a ton of work to bridge those gaps through collaboration, open conversations, and really figuring out how to broker the right open, honest conversation that the teams need in order to get those open issues. And when we dig in, it's often simpler than we think it's going to be, right? Like the technology teams are often concerned that we're going to force them into building a bunch of stuff really quickly without paying off the tech debt or having a strategy for managing the tech debt that's going to ensue from that intentional decision to see whether something works, right? Because oftentimes you get the pressure in R&D teams to move fast and ship and do all of these things so we can learn. But there's not always time set aside at the end of that learning to actually really productize that offering, because trade-offs have been made. And that communication pattern between the teams knowing that they're doing trade-offs and the executive team realizing that debt has to be paid off at some point, right? And there has to be real investment in how these things are truly scaled to actually support the market isn't always there. And then on the design side, oftentimes, in their ideal world, they would have a lot more time and effort to explore what the right execution is, but there's time pressures and constraints put on them too. So like, are we ever going to get a chance to actually build out what this experience should be? Is there going to be enough time for iteration? Or once we get this first version out, are we just putting a checkbox next to it and calling it done? And on the PM side, it's often that they can't have the impact, right, with the team that they want to have from a customer perspective fast enough, because their concerns are that the other two teams want to make sure we build it right before we learn if it's the right thing to build. And I think that by putting all of those things on the table and having those intentional conversations for each domain, the teams, once they realize that those are the real issues that they're grappling with, can have the right collaborative conversations to figure out what's the right thing to do now versus 6 months from now versus a year from now. and helping to support them to have those conversations and be honest and open about those conversations, I think has been the most successful tactic that on the R&D leadership team that we've taken, which I'm really grateful for.
And I think what you're describing right now, I'm just hearing you talk, and yeah, it sounds so simple, but as you kind of almost mentioned it, sometimes it really is just that simple. You have to almost like call out the elephant in the room. The elephant is quite big, you know what it is, but you have to have that conversation in order to address it. So to build that trust across these organizations, I wonder why people fail if it's so clear and simple. Is it is it that there's too much, I want to say like there's too much hurt in some of these conversations where historically there's been more finger pointing rather than understanding? Maybe that could be some of it. Do you have an opinion there?
Yeah, I think human beings are complicated. And I think very rarely, if we really listen to people, do they actually say what they need? Right? It's often tied to individual situations or experiences or product features. And it's often communicated not as the root cause of the challenge that they're dealing with. It's often defined. I'm trying to think of a really good example. I'm failing to come up with one right now, quite honestly, in the moment. But like there's several situations in which teams are thinking about that specific feature, and the way they're articulating what the real challenges are is not clear to the rest of the teams. And there's so many predictable taboos in R&D relationships, right? Like the tech teams always want to avoid tech debt, and the designers always want to spend a lot of extra cycles to figure out what the right experience is, and the PMs always want to rush to whatever solution is going to get to some customer value and put some points on the board. And I think it's those assumptions of the taboo scenarios that have been repeated through many R&D organizations over time have led to almost like blindness to the real issues that these teams are experiencing, and these, you know, um, functions
Sure.
and disciplines are experiencing. And so I think that we have to kind of erase those preconceived notions, biases, assumptions that what other engineers in the past have said to us, what other designers in the past have said to us, what other product managers in the past have said to us, and really lean in with curiosity to understand what's the issue underneath the issue that's being communicated for this one particular feature experience. And we follow patterns. So as humans, we rarely invest the time to actually do that.
So, Alex, the reason why I wanted you to maybe try and struggle with that question a little bit and articulate it is because what I want to, so what we're about to discuss is how do you become an AI first organization? And I think people often miss the people element of transformations, no matter how many times, again, this is like another elephant in the room. You need to have the right people and the right culture and mindset in order to accomplish any of these tasks. And it sounds like by you stepping into the leadership position at Typeform, and being able to have the ability to have these kinds of conversations actually created a foundation for you to build on to help create change. I mean, Typeform is not, well, technically an AI native company, right? Like you've been around for a while, even though I'm sure there's been elements of AI in your product.
Yeah.
Uh, so let's actually start and have this discussion. And before we get into deep with it, I always like to start with a little bit of definitions. So because I hear the terms like AI first being thrown around quite a bit. So I'm curious what your definition of an AI first organization really is.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. We've been grappling with the definitions because the definitions are so important, right? Because as soon as you're working off of two different definitions within an organization, it really bifurcates how you're going to essentially solve some of the challenges that you're dealing with. So we've been having really interesting conversations, even since that post on being AI first, to really define how we would look at being AI native, right?
Mm.
Which is from a product experience. That's how we would categorize it. And then being AI first, which is from an internal processes perspective and how we work. And for us, when we think about this, AI native is about, creating that really intentional product experience where AI doesn't feel bolted on. You have a co-pilot or some sort of assistive AI that is really driving adoption of your features, discoverability of your features without people having to use the GUI to get to those things and understand every new thing that you're adding into the product, which for, many companies, they get to that place where they're listening to their customers and they're evolving their product and they're adding new capabilities and features, and discoverability and usage and all of those things start to become issues as you have more and more and more and more capabilities in the platform. And so that assistive AI investment can help mitigate some of that, really drive that adoption, drive that discoverability, and help you address some of those challenges. And then as we think about being AI native, agentic solutions for differentiation are surfacing as well, right? So how can we get even beyond what the in-product point and click experience can get you, solutions for our customers to solve real meaningful differences for them, take action for them, give them information that's not necessarily available solely within your own platform. And then extensibility for scale, which is another thing that we're thinking about right now. MCPs are all the rage, and people are continuing to talk about how you can get, other platforms like ChatGPT and Claude and Anthropic to really interface with your product. So how do you start a workflow without even being in Typeform and kicking off a form generation, form creation piece? We're thinking about all of those things and those investments. And I think some are easier to understand how to take to market, how to get the right kind of pricing and packaging and consumption models oriented towards them. And some of them are a little trickier and riskier, like some of the extensibility elements where we're still early in our journey of exploring those and figuring out, how can we take that to market and have it actually be supportive for the business model and not in conflict with the business model. Whereas when I think about AI first, it's about every workflow and every team using AI intentionally to move faster and to be smarter in the way that they're moving. And so that shared language has really given us a vision that we could rally around. And it helps people understand, when they're working on either a process improvement or a new capability, where within that range it would sit and what pillar of our AI strategy they're delivering on.
When you started on this path to becoming, and I'm just going to focus right now on AI first, because
Yeah.
rather than the complexity of becoming truly like
Yeah.
AI foundational in your product, as you're kind of describing. So, becoming an AI first organization, uh, it- was this like a rapid aha light bulb moment? Was it gradual? And let's actually start there. Like, how did it come about? Was it you driving it? Was it your leader, like the full leadership team? Um, Walk us through that part.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think our chief people officer, Laura Daniels, who's fantastic, happened to mention in one of our LT sessions after she had attended an event where they're thinking about, people strategies to support AI native organizations and really what that means. Um, she came back to an LT session and shared some really good context in terms of, the people function is thinking 5-10 years ahead. What does this mean for organizations? How are they going to evolve? And she was surfacing this concept of a super IC, right? That could do a lot of different things, and several assisted by AI. And I've gone to a few other events where this concept of specifically within the application of R&D organizations or product development, there's inflammatory things being said, right? Everywhere from the edge of, oh, you can get by with a quarter or a tenth of the engineers that you have today if you just leverage AI, all the way through there's not going to be distinct functions in product design and engineering anymore because everyone's going to meld into one by being able to go across all of these tools and do all of these things. And I think any extremist views, as I would describe them, that move into those directions are challenging, and I don't know that that's a realistic outcome for most organizations. Maybe there's some folks on the edges where those things would be pretty practical for them, but at least as I think about the strategy at Typeform, I don't see that as a realistic outcome in the next couple of years, and who knows beyond that, because this domain moves so quickly. So that inspired us to think about this, and one of And the interesting things is I work with an incredibly talented R&D organization, probably the most talented organization that I've ever had the privilege of working with in my career. And so many of them, even without formal support of exploring some of these tools, or being pushed to leverage certain AI in their daily work, they've actually taken it upon themselves to start exploring tools and asking for access to things to try to accelerate workflows intentionally. And so this is one of those moments where, instead of pushing back, overly relying on risks associated with, you know, I call it fake paranoia, right? Where security risks and legal risks and all of those risks start to get surfaced in very generic terms without really looking at the proposal of what the individual is saying
Hmm.
and seeing what the risks actually are. Because until you look at that proposed solution, any risk assessment you're getting from legal or security is a blanket one towards all AI, right? And it's just not specific enough, and no effort has been made to actually see what we could do to shore up those risks. So without saying no, enabling the teams to figure out what would actually be helpful for them, and investing in POCs to test out how they could improve their workflows and their jobs, both from an accuracy and an efficiency perspective, by leveraging tools available in the market, was one of the critical components that I think we did differently. Or maybe similarly, I don't know. I haven't. You've spoken to more folks who are trying to play with AI to see where
Well,
those
that's a
gaps.
big challenge, actually. So what you're talking about here, I'm hearing more often is that they're getting the blanket legal roadblock
Mm.
around, well, we don't want our data to be, fed into these models, there's security risks, and therefore there is no AI. And so what I'm actually seeing, and this is, I think, plays out in many organizations, is a lot of people using their personal computers, buying apps personally, and still putting in, like it or not, they're still putting in some of the company information. So it actually would be more safe if they did a different approach of really understanding those risks and creating better conditions internally for people to really use the tools. People are going to use these tools.
Yeah.
But, I wonder, though, given that you're at an organization that I think is innovative, and so you're attracting, employees who want to use the next new thing, so maybe you actually have an easier time of becoming AI first, because people are naturally, like, that's what I'm hearing from you, is our
Yeah.
leadership is aware of it, and also we're getting this bottom up interest and pressure to do something with this, so we kind of have a forcing function both ways. Do you find that there are pockets in your organization that doesn't exist, where there is maybe a lot more resistance, and is that maybe just the compliance part? Like, so talk to me about, as an organization, because Typeform is more than just R&D department.
It is, absolutely. And I would say R&D is definitely pushing the boundaries of where we can leverage AI, just inherently by being people who build technology more. It's easier and faster for us to adopt said technology as well. But I think, actually, given all of the things that you've shared, Rina, the one thing that I think, as I reflect back on the journey, that we probably did differently is, instead of assuming an oversimplification of how AI tools can impact the organization, we actually did the opposite. And we had an offsite, I think it was back in March of this year, where we brought together data, infra, security, PMs, designers, engineers, and some other cross-functional folks as well, to really think about what needs to be true in order for us to feel comfortable enabling key AI tools and processes within our systems. And I think it's like, no one wants to act or be honest about the fact that none of us really truly know all of it, right? I'm going to say something inflammatory that maybe people may disagree with me about, but I think it's impossible to know everything there is to know about every single facet that AI tools can impact every other part of the business, right? Like, the level of visibility you would need to have is so high, and the level of depth with each function that you would need to have is so high, that there is no getting around having to say, look, I don't know what the impact is going to be to these functions that I'm not necessarily in 24/7. And so the best way to do it is to admit that and to bring people together and to ask them. And everybody in the room has to admit that they don't know how it's going to impact every other party, right? Because it's this false knowing that ends up getting communicated that's like that turns these situations of exploration and innovation into scenarios where people get told no because we know it's going to impact you negatively, it's going to impact the organization negatively, or it's going to put things at risk without even really looking at what the details of that proposal are. That I think can unlock a lot of doors. So that doing that and bringing people together and facilitating conversations. And some of these conversations were uncomfortable, right? Because people have heard of different tools that are more helpful in certain situations than others, and there's different ways to structure how you would purchase that tool. Are you going to buy it as a small company and get some of those protections? Or are you going to buy an enterprise plan? And then who's going to get access? And how are you going to manage whether the access is being used appropriately or not? There's a lot of tricky and hard conversations. And I would say the biggest place where, from an industry perspective and organizational structure perspective, that I think most organizations are going to run into roadblocks is procurement for these tools, right? Because, and I think for our learning specifically, where there's so many tools, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. Normally you have a use case, right? You need to buy a tool to solve X problem, and there's probably a handful of competitors, and you can probably eliminate a couple just by virtue of the fact that they don't quite do exactly what you need, and then you go through the procurement process for the rest of them. But when you're looking at AI tools, especially in the last couple of years, the explosion of new products, new tools, new models, new sources of procuring those models is astronomically large, right? Much more than I think most procurement processes were built to withstand. And so that's been the biggest challenge for us, is unlocking at scale POCs for, 10 to 20 AI tools at a given time in a safe environment, while also then following the rest of that procurement process through once we've decided what we actually want to purchase for what problem space or solution. So I have a ton of empathy for all of the teams involved in procurement right now, because it's not just a small increment in terms of what they're being asked to do as they're being asked to evaluate these AI tools. It is a full step change for that flow, that function, and the speed at which procurement processes exist. And I think that's where most folks are going to run into challenges as they start to bring AI tools into the fold and into what their organization is able to use.
Aleks, I just want to call this out because I actually think this is what you're talking about here has deep implications for all companies over the next, I don't even know how long. Because I'm also hearing, understandably, this problem that you're articulating from procurement. There's also a problem, I'll say one of, how do I put this? In Silicon Valley, where all of these tools are being founded, I think there's a perception now that it's just going to be the way it is, that there will be 10 competitors for anything because of just how fast things are changing. And so the other question that I don't think we have a good answer for is, well, what's the longevity of each solution that we buy into? Because if there's going to be massive competition, some of these are going to lose over time, and you make a bet. And so it is a real decision of how, it has serious implications as you build, especially if you build businesses on top of it. And I think that's why a lot of what I'm understanding, a lot of companies are starting to think, maybe I do something more localized where there's a limit of dependency on a third party. But okay, so what I'm hearing from you is, it's interesting because I didn't come into this conversation thinking about it this way. So you've changed my mind that your best friend, if you're in a AI first transformation, should actually be someone in procurement. Like, you have to bring them along for the journey sooner. It's not necessarily even the selection committee in R&D. It's also like the people, because those people, to your point, are already open to using new tools, or they're aware of what's going on in the landscape, versus procurement, which maybe are not traditionally aware of these tools. So would you say, so how did you bring procurement along? How did you do
I
it?
think that's such a good question, Rena, because I think I could see this going sideways too, because it's not enough to say to procurement, hey, we're going to be POCing some new AI tools. Okay, great. Shake hands and move on. You have to really set an expectation, and you have to, I would almost say, like, lean in early and say, look, we have a fundamentally new need. And this new need means that we need to look at 10x the scale of tools we usually would. We want to do a POC to prove out what's actually going to work, which means we're going to have access, and people are going to have to use it, and we're going to have some limits around what types of situations we can use it in, et cetera, and how much we're willing to pay for trial periods and all of those kinds of things. But we need to prove out whether the things that we want to use this for is actually good quality or not. Because I think this is the other fundamental difference, is whether the AI tools are helpful or not is so dependent on the model structure and quality, the latency, the cost. Like, there's so many different variables that are actually variable. That's not necessarily true for
Mm,
traditional tool purchases, that you find yourself in a situation where you can't, like in other situations, you can just, maybe a POC is necessary, maybe not. The tool has enough, domain expertise as it relates to what you're trying to do. They solve this problem for lots of other organizations, so you're solid. But these tools have some interesting criteria. One is that there's a lot of variability in the quality, the speed, and the cost that you're going to pay for them based on different situations and use cases. And they're also usually relatively new to the market, which means they haven't been pressure tested through all of the different use cases, and they're not necessarily specific to you and your type of business. They're broader. And so the POC becomes non negotiable. You must go through one in order to compare the output of the tools to validate whether something actually can meet your needs or not. And sometimes those things, you have a front runner that you think is going to win at the beginning of those conversations, and somebody else completely overtakes them based on some of those other variables by the time you're done with the POC. So you have to remain flexible. And having that conversation with procurement to set that expectation that fundamentally you and them are going to have to come up with another process that's not the standard procurement process for these explorations is critical. Because what I've seen happen so often is, hey, we want to run all of these POCs through AI. Great, here's our procurement process. And they just send you to their standard approach or process, which is not going to meet your needs, right? You'll be stuck in approval processes and reviews and documentation submissions and all of this stuff that honestly, in many of these cases, may not exist for some of your, you know, potential providers at the level that your organization is going to need in order for it to be effective. And so pushing 10 potential tools in the direction of getting you this like very granular context is hard, right? And it drags on for months and months and months, versus if you can create a lightweight POC for AI tools approach in partnership with procurement, knowing that, maybe you commit to not putting any sensitive company data in there. You constrain who has access to use it just for the purposes of the POC, and you involve them in that process. And then they're much more flexible and creative, and they might actually like the process too, right? Because it's forcing them to do something a little bit differently, to think about their domain in a little bit more of an innovative way that supports the business. So I would definitely make procurement your best friend through this process, but I would also make it very clear that whatever your current processes are not going to be sufficient to support the POC needs for AI related tools, and you are going to have to co-create a new process with them on that. Unless, of course, somehow some of these organizations have already figured out how magically fast and incredible tools. Then in that case, I think it would, kudos to them, but I haven't come across one yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, you have me thinking. So I have two questions based on this. One is it's not actually more of a comment, I suppose, procurement, but I'm also thinking, people in finance. What you said is true. This is a variable cost. It's not fixed. It's not similar to, as like you're buying licenses and here's how many licenses, here's the monthly cost or annual cost. This is a variable cost structure. And I saw a study about 2025 benchmark around that AI companies adopting AI are seeing as large as 6 to 15% margin hit. Like, as in that's like double the marketing budget of some like 15% of your revenue is now going into unforeseen AI costs. So this is not trivial to get right, but also to your point, companies have to pay. This is an investment. Companies have to pay this cost to really understand uh, what new value they can be delivering, how they can also, in many cases, I don't want to say rework, but how they can add additional points of leverage for each person that they have on the team. So this is value creation when done right, but you have to your point, do it right. Um, my actual question to you is, given that there may be a need to test something like 10 tools, this is not normal. Like, it's not two or three, it's 10. How do you prevent that process from being just completely chaotic, paralysis, just not really making a decision, or avoiding the situation where you have a pocket which prefers tool A, a pocket tool B, and they don't mesh well together?
Yeah, that's a great question. From my perspective, the most success we've had is in standardizing the thing or the situation we're evaluating. So if the tool is, let's say we explored a bunch of tools to support engineers through coding, right? Coding assistance, the things that are being coded, the prompts that are being used are standardized and very similar or the same in many instances
Tool
across
agnostic.
different teams. And that way you can actually compare the output more or less apples to apples, maybe not apples to apples fully, because there's a little bit of preferential treatment around, we all have preferences for which apples we love to eat versus not, but enough that like you're getting an apple, right? It may be a slightly different flavor, consistency, sourness profile, but you're getting an apple roughly, and it's figuring out which apple is the right apple for your business needs, more or less relative to the other options that exist. And that's been really helpful and successful for us, is to be able to standardize that as much as possible and include even people with diverse needs in that ecosystem, right? So if we have 4 different teams that would want to use it in 4 different ways, they each have their standardized set of tool or prompts or needs, etc., that are going through the same way through all of these, products that we're testing. And then we figure out, maybe there's some needs are higher value than others. And so higher quality there would give us a higher score in terms of likelihood towards one product winning over another. But it's just aligning on what are you going to test, make sure it's consistent across the tools, and what are the criteria by which you decide which tool wins. Because sometimes that involves weighting. Not all problems are created equal, not all solutions are created equal, right? And so as long as you go into that process knowing which ones are the most important problem spaces to solve, then the team can usually get to a really good place naturally.
So then I think that actually segues into my next question, which is success criteria, because what you're talking about is you have to have good success criteria up front to make the decision. I completely agree with you. It's actually a shame that people don't put in the work early, and then they end up in a situation where they don't have those criteria well defined, and then they can't make a good decision. So how do you know that, going back to just actually becoming an AI first organization, how do you know that you've done it, or that you're entering a new stage of maturity? How do you measure success here?
Yeah. So for me, the necessary conditions for success as we're thinking about um, any of these processes where you're selecting new tools, building new procurement processes, leveraging AI to support your frameworks, is clarity and observability. Those are 2 variables that are incredibly important. So you need a clear strategy that people can repeat back. And that's critical, right? Because if you don't understand something, then you can't articulate it back to somebody else, which is one of those old adages. If you truly understand something or you want to understand something, teach it to someone else, and that'll help you make sure that you retain that context. So in our case, it's understanding the AI strategy, understanding the processes and the problem spaces, and where those tools or those opportunities for innovation exist, and what specifically you're going to get out of that innovation. Are you thinking that it's going to be a cost savings? Are you thinking it's going to be a quality update? Like the output quality is going to be so much higher by using these tools. Is it going to be a speed benefit, right? Is it some combination of these three things? Is it something else? So that's really critical. And then you need the observability to know whether those things are actually true. Is it working? Usage data, quality metrics, cost trade offs, all of those things. So without both the clarity for the problem space, what you're working on, how it's going to support the business or your processes, and without the observability to understand whether those things are being impacted by the investment that you're making in some of these tools, it is next to impossible from my experience to be able to make good decisions in this space. And then you end up with AI adoption as chaos, right? Full chaos throughout the org and no way to sort of rein it back in without shutting it down unanimously, which is not good, right? For the rest of the org.
So your answer essentially is, I mean, this is one of those things that generally does not change. You need to be aware of what you're trying to accomplish, and you need to be able to measure whether or not you're getting there. So then my question to you is, so how are you doing it? So what was your, or if you can share, what was
Yeah.
your North Star goal and how are you measuring it?
Yeah. Our North Star goal to become an AI first organization is quality and speed for our R&D processes, right? So a lot of teams and domains and disciplines are spending a lot of time doing things in a very manual way, right? And or depleting resources in certain functions like research for things that AI can dramatically accelerate, like competitive intel, right? You might have to double check and make sure that some of the things you're getting back are true, but overall, it'll generate a fairly accurate, good understanding of where your competitors stand in a lot of different domains. And maybe there's a recency bias against it, right? Like some of the new features they would have released or some of the new moves they would have made aren't captured, but that's an easier bridge for you to close by just looking at those competitors' pages, products, et cetera, to get a sense for what's going on there. Um, so being able to think about where are we spending time that is manually depleting resources from either key teams or key disciplines, and being able to ask yourself the question, could AI help me do this better or faster? And if the answer is yes, which AI tool can help me do this better and faster? And then going through that evaluation process to make sure that the tools that you're using are actually getting you to a better output that's mostly accurate, faster, and not cost prohibitive from a usage perspective to get to that output. And we've done that across disciplines, right? Because I think there's the cross-functional pieces that, from a communication alignment, generating assets to help tell your strategy story, your roadmap story, et cetera, that the three groups can do together. Individually, each function needs different tools, distinct tools to help them do things faster, better, et cetera. So we have PMs leveraging things like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini for on product requirements, right? And defining what those are and doing some deep research for certain subsets of customers and what their pain points are and what their experiences are, et cetera. And of course, augmenting that with other research that we're doing internally. But it's by combining all of those things that we can get to, instead of it taking you a week to generate a one pager that's just right on a lot of these things, you can have a thought partner in some of these AI tools that can help you get there faster, at least to 80%. And then you refine with the team moving forward from there. Similar things from a design perspective. We've seen actually some of our most innovative stuff come out of the design team because we have a design system that they've now connected to an MCP and a coding tool. So that basically what happens is if there's a design in Figma that looks decent and the team's pulled it together, that we can actually accelerate the coding of that. 80% of the code actually gets written through the MCP. And it's 80% right. So the engineers definitely have to tweak and adjust things, but they become more reviewers and editors in some of those instances than necessarily writing that code from scratch, which has been a really interesting partnership between design and engineering. And then we don't have to, it's not generic code because it's using our existing design system. We're not having to make sure it kind of looks similar, but it's fundamentally different. It's very aligned with the rest of the product experience, which is really exciting. And then rolling out those coding agents to the rest of the engineering org, we started with I think 20% adoption. 20% of our engineers were using these coding assistants, and now we're at 80%, and we're trying to get to 90% by the end of the year, and then 100% in Q1. And so really just having an intentional approach to having the functions understand how AI can help them accelerate their core jobs, giving them the access to POCs and tools that can help them do that, and then continuing to enable across the organization. There's some of its standard change management things, right? The things we've learned from change management and other disciplines can help in AI, but you do really have to have that benefit clear to the disciplines themselves in order for people, humans, to start to adopt these things and to be motivated to use them and to accelerate their workflows.
Alex, in what you're saying, if you can save 80% of your time, you become just a much more effective, efficient person that in terms of your adoption, I'm almost not, I mean, amazing that you're at 80%, but I'm almost not surprised because if I were an engineer and I'm not using these tools, I now have fallen behind my peers. And it's probably very easy to see that because of just how much more people who are leveraging these tools are able to accomplish. So it almost like drives itself in a way, right? So that's phenomenal still. Do you have I'm just curious if you have an example of like maybe some like more concrete example of what that means for your business, what impacts you've seen on the team.
Absolutely. I actually have a couple. So, in the engineering organization, we measure PRs that are submitted by engineers, which is essentially the codes that they're submitting into the product. And what happens is at the beginning of the year, we measure it pretty consistently over, I think we've had our measurements in place for a few years. And since the beginning of the year, when we've really started this investment in AI, we've had a 200% increase in the volume of PRs that are being submitted on a regular basis by our engineers. And so to me, that speaks to the amount of and the level of speed and acceleration that these AI tools are able to provide for our teams, which is incredible. Um, and I'm excited to just see more to come. And there may be some critics out there that are like, well, PRs aren't always the cleanest metric as you think about evaluating true engineering speed because they're able to be manipulated by other variables like the size of the tickets and all of that kind of stuff. True, but I have practical examples as well. So a couple of years ago, when I started, there were questions that I had about how long it took, for example, to get an integration out the door. And when was the last time we built a new block within the builder that added net new functionality? And the answers were the last block was built a few years before that. And some of the integrations took quite a while. So we're talking at least a quarter, if not sometimes for the more complex ones, a couple of quarters to get live for a team. And through resourcing changes, AI investment, architecture, and a few other investments that we've made as an organization, we have now completely accelerated both of those domains. We are getting integrations out the door in a matter of hours at this point, instead of in a matter of quarters, which is just wild to see how much impact the team has had, especially with support from AI. And on a blocks perspective, we are shipping multiple in a single quarter, which is also incredible. And this was a domain that was so complex that nobody really wanted to touch it for a while. It was one of those hot potatoes that just kept getting passed around. And now we have a really powerful team leveraging AI, leveraging expertise in architecture to drive innovation in this space in a way that is sustainable, that is scalable. And it's AI that has made the difference.
Yeah, I almost want to change the term now, like becoming a 10x, like 10x product manager. It sounds like you became a 100x organization. And to my previous point around each engineer needing to adopt this for themselves, like on an organizational level, if an organization does not adopt it, it's going to be easy to see, like in terms of just what you're describing here, instead of quarterly annual changes, you're doing it multiple times a quarter. That's going to only increase in terms of speed. So just again, kudos to you for being on the forefront here of this truly truly innovative step change function in in our lifetime. Just amazing, Alex. So, given everything we've talked about today, and thank you for sharing just your knowledge and wisdom here. Um, what would you say to a product leader who is maybe at the start of the journey? What advice would you have for them?
I would say start by defining what these terms mean to you: AI native, AI first, whatever terms that you're using within your organization. Start defining it and get ahead of what your company thinks that is, because that's going to be critical. Um, Build a strategy that is easy to understand, so much so that you can have people who are not in your function repeat that back to you and it still makes sense and retains the values that you think that it should. Invest in the observability and do that from the start. Don't wait until you've invested in these tools and then you can't answer questions about, how much faster is it helping you be? How much more accurate? What is the cost? Because those are going to be questions that are going to be asked. And the longer that you put those off, the more risk it puts your strategy under. Um, and then lead with trust. So give your teams permission to experiment within a framework and distance that from the output that your organization expects, right? Really position that as R&D, research and development. It shouldn't be on your roadmap, right? It should be the bonuses that aren't counted on in your roadmap that can bring additional acceleration and benefits. But if you put too much delivery requirement and expectation around when some of these benefits and some of these elements are going to ship, you set the team up for failure, because that's, I think, when some of the decision making quality deteriorates over time. So that would be a critical one as well, because AI transformation isn't just about flashy demos, right? Or what you can show other people. It's really about making AI that invisible accelerant, that 10x investment of everything that your company does. And it can go beyond R&D as a whole as well. And so supporting others on their journey internally is critical. And then the last piece that I'll say is be honest about where you are. None of us know all of it. And I know that's incredibly uncomfortable to admit in some of these meetings where you're with your really intelligent peers who maybe have more expertise in some areas. Be honest about what you know, what you don't know, and ask the question that you think is a dumb question, because it's those questions that are going to get you all to the right alignment, the right prioritization, and the right investments. And avoiding those questions just gets you to suboptimal outcomes that have blind spots that none of you saw.
Yeah, that advice rings true no matter if you're, embarking on this kind of transformation. The more that you can just admit there's a lot more that we don't know than we know, the better everyone is. And almost like a relief to be able to say that out loud for you and also for, I think, everybody else on the team. Well, Alex, thanks so much, like I said, for sharing your wisdom here. How can people follow you or find you after they hear this recording?
Yeah, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, connect with me. I'm constantly sharing updates from the team. We have a new dynamic in the team that we've started called Type Talks that then get turned into blog posts and pieces of content, and they span every domain that's touching AI. So you'll hear from data, you'll hear from design, from product, from engineering, from customer success. We've had some successes there as well. Our customer success team is using AI to deflect tons of tickets, and our customers are actually extremely satisfied with some of those experiences. And so just you'll hear a lot more about all of the innovative ways that we're leveraging AI, and hopefully it inspires you. And we'd love to hear stories of what other people are learning through their explorations with AI tools to accelerate their businesses as well.
Well, there you have it. And we'll make sure to add links to your profile. Definitely, like I said, this conversation started because of a LinkedIn post. And so I do absolutely recommend please follow Aleks Bass. And thank you all for tuning into another episode of Productside Stories. If you found this conversation valuable, please do not keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend and subscribe to Productside Stories so you don't miss a future episode. Thank you for tuning into Productside Stories. I hope today's insights inspire you and propel your product journey forward. Remember, every challenge is a lesson waiting to be learned. And you can also visit us at productside.com for more free resources like webinars, templates, playbooks, and other product wisdom repackaged for you. I'm Rina Alexin, and until next time, keep innovating, keep leading, and keep creating stories worth sharing.